Chapter 51. You are listening at novelfull.audio. But with the elixir of life staring him right in the face, how could Yingyun just shrug it off? Yuner, he said, glancing at Yingyun, you really think this stuff could lead to immortality? For some reason, Yingyun suddenly wanted his slacker son's opinion. Chapter 59, Su Fu sets sail. Who gets the elixir? Immortality? Yingyun was surprised by the question. Why was Yingyun singling him out instead of Gainye? Had his backup plan been rumbled? That thought made Yingyun tense up. He'd miss out on a ton of rewards if he got caught. Not that he was hurting for rewards these days, but whoever complains about having too much? Then Yingyun saw the look on Yingyun's face and relaxed immediately. No sweat. Yingyun figured Yingyun was thinking about how he tried to stop the search for the elixir in the first place. Being familiar with Qin Dynasty history, Yingyun knew that the potions and weird concoctions Yingyun was taking were actually destroying his body, stealing years he could have had. Just like that Kyushu emperor in the picture, totally duped by a bunch of quack alchemists. Right, come to think of it, the alchemist who conned Qin Shi Huang was named Su Fu, wasn't he? But that wasn't the point right now. Yingyun had asked a question, so he had to answer. Could be. After a moment, Yingyun decided to go with the truth. The thing was, Su Fu's elixir of life had major drawbacks. It might extend life, but it wouldn't grant true immortality. Whether immortality was even possible was up for debate, but after taking that pill, even a regular Joe could live for thousands of years. For most folks in Kyushu who barely cracked a century, that was practically forever. So it really exists. Yingyun had half expected it, but he was still taken aback and let out a sigh, especially coming from Yingyun, who'd been dead set against the search for immortality. That made it even more surprising. Yingyun knew Yingyun wasn't trying to stop him just to seize the throne after he kicked the bucket. He had other reasons. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone against his usual behavior and opposed the whole thing so fiercely. But now, he was saying there was an elixir. Dad, if you want an elixir, I can get you one in a few days. It'll be even better than the one Su Fu cooked up. Yingyun said, seeing the regret on Yingyun's face. He didn't have one right now, of course. But he remembered that around the Daqin border, there were tons of thousand-year-old ginseng roots, Tianshan snow lotus, and all kinds of crazy stuff. They'd been sitting there untouched for ages, their medicinal effects off the charts. Taking some of that now, even if it didn't grant immortality, it'd buy him plenty of extra time. Plus, Yingyun still felt like Emperor Shi Tian was alive and invincible. Clearly, he hadn't been knocked around by life enough yet, so the real dragon was probably still hiding somewhere in Kyushu. When the time came, he'd just kill it himself and snag the dragon essence. Humph. Yingyun's face darkened. Don't worry about elixirs. Just work harder, and I might actually smile before I die. Elixir of life. If it was that easy to come by, Kyushu would have been transformed a long time ago. Still, deep down, Yingyun was pleased that Yingyun was offering to get him one, but then he remembered Yingyun's lazy attitude, and he felt a surge of annoyance. So damn lazy. Whatever. Yingyun touched his nose and shook his head. Figures. No good deed goes unpunished. Still, what he'd said was true. Never mind. He gave up on the explanation, stretched, and glanced casually at the scene on the Heavenly Tao gold list. If he remembered right, Su Fu was about to down the elixir himself, then trick the Emperor of Zhou into sailing overseas to find the final ingredient for refining the elixir. And then disappear for good. Maybe he could find some clues about dragons through this Heavenly Tao gold list. The thought popped into his head. Yeah, Yingyun had a bad temper and often yelled at him. But he was still his father. And as long as the Qin existed, he could be a salty fish with peace of mind. He doubted he'd become the target of a continent-wide beatdown after the death of Qin too. Not with his cultivation level, but if Great Qin really fell apart, things wouldn't be pretty for Yingyun. And just as Yingyun was thinking all this, the picture on the gold list flickered. The new emperor of the Great Zhou Dynasty was meeting with Su Fu again. Just like before, the ambitious emperor was giving Su Fu an ultimatum. Refine the elixir of life or face the music. Back in the alchemy room, Su Fu, under the watchful eyes of the emperor's spies, pretended to refine the elixir while plotting his escape. This was the biggest life-or-death situation he'd faced since becoming an alchemist. He racked his brain, waiting for the emperor to lose patience and try to kill him. Then, Su Fu dropped a bombshell. The elixir of life was ready. The new emperor was ecstatic. He didn't even bother with a formal summons, rushing to the alchemy room himself, but when faced with the golden elixir, he hesitated to take it. Su Fu explained that the elixir was too potent and needed a catalyst. And that catalyst couldn't be found in Kyushu. They'd have to sail across the ocean to find it on some magical island. The new emperor hesitated but ultimately agreed to Su Fu's request. He let him sail off to find the medicine. The emperor figured he already had the elixir. If Su Fu didn't come back, he'd just risk his life and take the elixir later on. If it worked, he'd live forever. If not, well, that was life. This new emperor was ambitious, but he was also a tyrant. Way worse than his old man. So Su Fu got the emperor's blessing, gathered 500 pairs of young boys and girls as sacrifices, and set sail with 30,000 soldiers to find the elixir, and just when everyone thought the emperor had secured immortality, Su Fu, now at sea, secretly pulled out a golden pill in a closed room. Was that the real elixir of life? Chapter 60, Swallowing the Elixir. Su Fu's Transformation. Su Fu was playing everyone like a fiddle. Seeing this, everyone in Zhou was floored. When Su Fu handed the elixir to the emperor of Zhou, people were curious how he planned to live for 2,000 years without phoenix blood. Now it all made sense. Su Fu had swiped the real elixir for himself. Su Fu stared at the elixir, a glint of resolve in his eyes, then, without hesitation, he swallowed it whole. Golden light exploded from his belly. Faintly, the roar of a phoenix could be heard, the Han Dynasty, Weiyang Palace. That's Su Fu. He fooled them all. Lu Bang was shocked and then increasingly impressed by Su Fu's scheme. Lu Bang felt like Su Fu was cut from the same cloth. They were both gangsters. They both spent their lives doing everything wrong. Chapter 52. You are listening at novelfull.audio. But they all made it big and scored some major wins. They knew how to read the room and grab any advantage, even if it meant taking a risk. Thinking back, he built that road as a feint, secretly invaded Qinsong, and dealt Xiang Yu's army a massive blow, almost knocking him out of the game. And that's how the Han Dynasty came to be. If Su Fu had given the elixir of life to the new Zhou emperor, the whole map of Kyushu would be totally different. Zhang Liang rarely nodded, saying gravely, even though it was a fluke, Su Fu, kind of saved Kyushu. Just imagine, if Su Fu had handed over the elixir to the Zhou emperor, it would have been an utter disaster, not just for Kyushu back then. Even 2,000 years later, the impact would be huge. After all, 2,000 years is plenty of time for an emperor to screw things up. Maybe he could have actually unified Kyushu. But because of one decision by Su Fu, that possibility went up in smoke. Daming, Forbidden City. We were just wondering, what's a person gonna do once they're immortal? Staring at the picture on the Taoist golden list, Zhu Yuanzhang's eyes lit up with curiosity, and he muttered softly. I got no idea. Zhu Di was totally lost. What do immortals even think about? Who knows? But, watching Su Fu gulp down the elixir, a serious look crept onto Zhu Di's face. Is Emperor Shakshan about to show up? Everyone knew that the fourth-ranked creature on the peerless list was Emperor Shitian. And this Su Fu must have been Emperor Shitian's name 2,000 years ago, so now, by taking the elixir of life, he was basically flipping the bird to the Zhou dynasty. If he wanted to live, he could never use the name Su Fu again. Maybe that's the real reason Su Fu became Emperor Shitian. Tang Dynasty, Song Dynasty. At that moment, many dynasties in Kyushu watched Su Fu swallow the elixir of life, a wave of solemnity washing over their faces. They knew that from now on, this Su Fu was probably gonna transform big time. Soon, the scene changed. after Su Fu took the elixir, nothing seemed different. He went on drawing sea charts and talking about directions to the fairy islands with a bunch of Zhou soldiers, until one stormy night. The terrifying waves seemed like they were going to swallow everything whole. It was a real whopper of a storm. Against that kind of natural power, even the strongest guys were just ants. Even top-tier experts could barely keep their heads above water. Maybe only the master-level fighters could have breezed through this storm. But even back in the great Zhou Dynasty, masters were hard to come by. Plus, to take out the Phoenix, Dazhou had sent out a bunch of their master-level guys. They had a nasty fight with the Phoenix and got messed up pretty bad. How could they go out to sea with Su Fu to hunt for the fairy mountain? So, among the soldiers sailing with Su Fu, the toughest guy was only a first-rate fighter. Of course, the new emperor of the great Zhou dynasty wasn't too worried, because he knew that Su Fu's first-rate strength was just from using drugs. His real strength was a joke. He wouldn't last long even against a second- or third-rate warrior. What was there to worry about? Just when everyone thought Su Fu was going to fight the storm tooth and nail, something unexpected happened. Faced with the storm that threatened to swallow everything, Su Fu channeled his energy and dug a hole in the bottom of the ship. Under normal circumstances, such a big hole would have all the soldiers scrambling to plug it. So what was going to happen in a storm like this? Almost instantly, the ship that Zhou dynasty had poured its resources into building fell apart. The storm ate everything. Everyone in Zhou was stunned again. This Su Fu was one cold dude. Never mind the soldiers on the same ship as Su Fu, even Su Fu's own life was in danger. A top-notch fighter. Even a grandmaster would have trouble with the power of nature. Plus, everyone in Kyushu now had a better understanding of the elixir of life. It could definitely make you live longer, but it didn't say anything about making you immortal. If he was unlucky, Su Fu might have ended up as a shipwreck victim right after taking the elixir, but what everyone feared didn't happen. The scene changed, and the killer storm was gone. The sky was clear and blue, the sun was shining on the sea, making the waves sparkle. In the distance, a small black dot could be seen on the horizon. As the camera zoomed in, everyone realized it was a deserted island. And right in front of it, Su Fu, utterly exhausted, dragged himself out of the sea. Ha ha ha. Su Fu was laughing, but he was winded and choking on seawater. He looked like he was about to fall apart. But no matter how bad it hurt, Su Fu didn't care. Because he knew he'd done it. The rest of the soldiers would think that Su Fu had died in the shipwreck after going back to Dezhou. They'd never guessed that he'd pulled off a daring escape. Eternal life. Struggling to his feet, Su Fu looked at his hands and laughed again. The emperor wanted immortality. But Su Fu was the one who got it. How could he not be stoked? Chapter 61 Su Fu levels up to Grandmaster and finally gets his dot. Su Fu pulled it off. Since he heard the news about the old emperor dying, Su Fu had been on edge, almost unable to sleep at night. It was the hardest time of his life. He was scared the new emperor would take him out. Ever since he cooked up the elixir of immortality, Su Fu's paranoia had only gotten worse. But now, he was dead. And the elixir of immortality had been left behind in Dezhou. Su Fu didn't care if the emperor dared to try it, or what would happen if he did. Because the elixir of immortality he gave the emperor was just a fake rejuvenation pill. He'd specially tweaked it so it was extra potent. It was packed with strong stuff. If some weak old dude ate it, he'd be in trouble. After hustling in Zhou for so many years, Su Fu knew how people thought. He was sure the new emperor wouldn't risk the elixir until his last breath, without the medicine lead. But even if he figured something was up after taking it, he'd probably drop dead from the pill's effects. That way, no one would know that Su Fu was the real immortal. Maybe I should recover first. Shaking his head, Su Fu snapped out of it, feeling the near-fatal injuries all over his body, and dragged himself towards the center of the island. Before setting sail, Su Fu had memorized the nearby sea area. He had even figured out the storm after watching the weather for days. His plan was airtight. Su Fu had a general idea of the island situation too. He found a place to crash pretty quickly. The scenes on the Tiandao Golden List flowed by, and half a year zipped by. Chapter 53. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Su Fu's injuries healed completely during this time, and his strength even improved a bit. He'd always been a big believer in eating for strength, and he'd been gobbling up treasures like candy. The problem was, all that medicinal power was just sitting there in his body, undigested and unused. But after taking the elixir of immortality made from phoenix blood, the insane power inside actually kickstarted all those dormant treasures. The result? Su Fu's strength went through the roof. He became a real powerhouse, tough enough to stand up to even a grandmaster. Everyone in Kyushu was blown away by this, not just Su Fu, seriously. For most people in Kyushu, using drugs to boost your power was like drinking poison to quench your thirst. All that stuff would mess with your energy flow, maybe even block it completely. That's why, aside from some herbs when they were just starting out, the real heavy hitters in Kyushu never relied on shortcuts like that, but Su Fu just blew everyone's minds. Actually, the moment he got his hands on that immortality elixir, he was already operating on a whole different level. Back into Qin, at Zhongtai Palace, Yingyun watched Su Fu, who was almost grandmaster level. A flicker of emotion crossed his face. That's Su Fu, he's one lucky guy. You've got to admit it. For someone with such terrible talent, Su Fu had come a long way. From the start, his potential was awful, and it never got any better. No matter what he tried, he'd used enough ginseng, snow lotus, and other rare stuff to buy a medium-sized kingdom. And all he got was first-class strength? A lot of people thought he was wasting good resources, but Su Fu did things his way. Now, he was practically a grandmaster thanks to all those drugs. More importantly, he'd swallowed phoenix blood and become immortal. It just goes to show you, there's always someone luckier than you are. While everyone else in Kyushu was shaking their heads, Su Fu spent the next 7 or 8 years chilling on his island. He'd sneak back to Kyushu now and then to get updates. When he heard he was presumed dead, he was relieved, but then he learned the new emperor was sending alchemists overseas to find more elixirs. Su Fu knew it wasn't safe to come out of hiding just yet. He was still too weak to go up against a dynasty like that. Even if he hit grandmaster, it wouldn't be enough, so Su Fu bought some supplies, hopped on a boat, and sailed back to his island. Over the years, he turned that desolate place into paradise. He even used his trips to Kyushu to stock up on books about medicine, divination, math, anything to keep him from going crazy with boredom. Su Fu lived alone on that island for almost 20 years, but now, everyone in Kyushu believed in the elixir of life. No question, in 30 years, Su Fu hadn't aged a day. Immortality. Watching Su Fu on the screen, almost every emperor in Kyushu took a deep breath, filled with envy, and over those decades, Su Fu finally broke through and hit grandmaster level. It took him 30 years to go from almost there to actually doing it. Without the elixir, he'd probably be pushing up daisies by now. No way he could have made that jump. Everyone had to admit it. Immortality was pretty sweet. Soon after his breakthrough, Su Fu picked up some exciting news while buying supplies. The emperor of the great Qin Dynasty was dead. Su Fu almost screamed with joy. The shadow hanging over him was finally gone. The Zhou emperor was gone. He didn't have to hide on that island anymore. How could he not be thrilled? Chapter 62, The Great Qin Dynasty Falls. Su Fu returns to Kyushu. Su Fu went back to his island, one last time. The Zhou emperor's death was great news, no doubt, but Su Fu still wasn't ready to mess with a giant like the Zhou. He figured he'd play it safe for a little while longer. He was immortal, after all. What's a few decades, more or less? His long life was just beginning. Everyone in Kyushu just watched Su Fu, shaking their heads, but they couldn't deny it. They were jealous. With forever to live, he could afford to take his time. 3 more years zipped by. Su Fu left the island more in those 3 years than he had in all the years before. The weight had lifted. He was still careful, but things were definitely looking up. Everyone figured Su Fu would keep a low profile for decades, waiting until nobody remembered him. Then came another piece of news that changed everything. The great Qin Dynasty had fallen. Su Fu's first thought was, no way, that the great Zhou dynasty was the real deal, the supreme power in Kyushu. How could it crumble so fast? To find out what was really going on, Su Fu thought it over and decided to see for himself, so he packed his bags, left the island, and headed for the old great Zhou dynasty. It was a huge risk. It hadn't been that long. Even if things had changed, there was no guarantee someone wouldn't recognize him, but the fate of the Zhou dynasty was too important. He couldn't rely on gossip from merchants, so Su Fu went back into Qin. Yingyun watched the scene unfold. It seems the great Zhou dynasty really did fall 2,000 years ago. The great Zhou dynasty. It was legendary. It had a feudal system and controlled almost half of Kyushu, but 2,000 years ago, it fell apart, splitting into a bunch of smaller kingdoms. The name Dazhou was almost forgotten. If it weren't for this scene, even Yingyun would have forgotten about that supreme dynasty. Guy spoke up, looks like we're in that time period. Yingyun nodded, a serious look on his face. The great Zhou dynasty had fallen. That was a fact, but how could such a powerful empire just collapse? People in Kyushu had all sorts of theories about why the great Zhou dynasty fell. Some said it was the feudal system, leading to rebellions and its downfall. Others claimed it was too greedy, trying to unite all 9 states and causing a huge mess. There were even weirder ideas, like meteor strikes or natural disasters, but none of it was confirmed. All anyone knew was that this supreme dynasty, which had stood strong in Kyushu for countless years, fell apart almost overnight. It was a mystery that sparked endless speculation. Would the truth about the fall of the great Zhou dynasty finally be revealed? Everyone in Kyushu was curious. They weren't expecting such a big reveal. The scenes on the screen kept moving. Su Fu was now a grandmaster. After a few days of travel, he set foot in the old great Zhou dynasty. Chapter 54. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Things were different, people were different. Su Fu looked at the familiar scene, a flicker of disorientation crossing his eyes. In the blink of an eye, decades had passed since he'd left Dazhou. Being back stirred up a lot of emotions, but decades of solitude on that island had given Su Fu time to think. So, after a quick look around, Su Fu headed toward what was left of the Zhou dynasty capital. Along the way, listening to the talk in the streets, Su Fu pieced together what had led to great Zhou's downfall. The new emperor had ambition, but lacked the talent to back it up. His obsession to unify Kyushu, this had driven him for decades, constantly planning and waging war. Peace was a distant memory. This made life miserable not just for the countries bordering Great Zhou, but also for Zhou's own vassal states and its own people. The only thing stopping rebellion was the raw power the new emperor had amassed. But everyone has their limits. The new emperor finally fell ill. On his deathbed, he pulled out the elixir of life he'd been hoarding for decades. He'd spent years searching for the medicine Su Fu had mentioned back then, but finding this fictional elixir was impossible. In desperation, the new emperor risked swallowing the elixir. Predictably, the potent dose of the rejuvenation pill killed him instantly. Immortality was always on the new emperor's mind, so he hadn't given much thought to choosing an heir. Consequently, Great Zhou had no successor. Amidst the power struggles, a 23-year-old prince, almost forgotten by the new emperor, was put on the throne. That was it. Factions, eunuchs, relatives, generals, and even heads of vassal states and emperors of vassal states, everyone was at each other's throats, and nobody took the kid emperor seriously. While they were squabbling, the smaller dynasties that Zhou had crushed over the years saw their chance and revolted. In the end, caught between internal strife and external threats, the mighty Zhou dynasty crumbled, gone in a flash, like a shooting star. Nobody thought the reason for Great Zhou's collapse was so simple, but after a moment's reflection, emperors across Kyushu were breaking out in a cold sweat. An unknown crown prince, relatives meddling in politics, eunuchs interfering in government, generals controlling armies, doing whatever they wanted, and vassal states waiting to pounce. Any one of these was a disaster. It was unbelievable that the great Zhou dynasty had lasted so long in such a precarious state and had even been the strongest in the 9 provinces. Its fall was both unexpected and inevitable. Chapter 63. The pseudonym is Emperor Shirtian. Su Fu goes crazy with borrowed skills. The destruction of the great Zhou dynasty was a huge blow to Su Fu. After all, he'd spent decades in lonely exile overseas, thanks to the pressure de Zhou had put on him, and now de Zhou was gone. Su Fu stood on the ruins of the burned-out Zhou capital, his face etched with uncertainty and complicated emotions. Haha, suddenly, Su Fu burst out laughing, unleashing his full master-level cultivation. Boom! The sky seemed to crack with thunder, echoing over the ruins. Grandmaster! His actions resonated with the Tao, able to trigger world-changing phenomena at the right moment, plus, Su Fu had consumed phoenix blood, making him different from ordinary masters. His emotional outburst caused dark clouds to gather and thunder to roll across the sky, but Su Fu was nothing if not adaptable. He knew that if the other emperors of Zhou learned he was alive, they'd be hunting him down for the secret to the elixir of life. Even as a master-level entity, how could he stand against the might of those dynasties? From today on, Su Fu is dead. Taking a deep breath, Su Fu stared at the war-torn capital of Dazhou and said coldly. He died in a shipwreck. Now, my name is Emperor Shutian. Boom! Those words shook the 9 provinces. Everyone had suspected Su Fu was Emperor Shutian, thanks to the Heavenly Tao Golden List. But hearing him admit it in person was still a shock, an entity who had lived for 2,000 years. Unbelievable. Just as everyone was reeling, the Heavenly Tao Golden List flashed forward, skipping ahead several years. After leaving the great Qin Dynasty, Emperor Shutian never returned to his island hideaway, but instead traveled throughout Kyushu. Soon, the name Emperor Shutian became known to some in Kyushu. Afraid of being recognized, Su Fu even made himself a mask, but he soon realized he'd been worrying over nothing. Anyone in Kyushu who knew him was either dead of old age or had perished with the fall of the great Zhou dynasty. Even if some had escaped, they were lying low, afraid to show their faces. These years were the most comfortable Su Fu had experienced in decades. No need to worry about being hunted. No need to hide in a cold cave. Su Fu met women, fell in love. It was a great life. But he soon recognized his weakness. His cultivation was too poor. Even though master-level entities were at the top of the Zhou pyramid, Su Fu worried his identity would be exposed. He knew a master's cultivation wasn't enough to survive a Zhou-wide manhunt. He'd been practicing in isolation all these years, with no master to guide him. Su Fu's strength had reached the mid-stage of master, and his true qi was terrifying. But if a real fight broke out, Su Fu feared he would lose. What master hadn't clawed their way up through mountains of corpses and seas of blood? They were experts in battlefield tactics, masters of countless martial arts. Even a simple sword move could be devastating, but what about Su Fu? He had become a master by taking drugs. He'd tricked his way to some ordinary herbs. Then, thanks to being appreciated by the emperor of the great Zhou dynasty, he'd gotten his hands on 1,000-year-old ginseng, Tianshan snow lotus. Eventually, he'd even consumed phoenix blood. Su Fu had no idea how to actually use the true qi in his body. Right now, Su Fu was relying on master-level true qi to travel the 9 states, doing good deeds and avoiding danger, but if he faced a strong opponent of the same level, he'd be exposed immediately. I have to become a disciple. After much deliberation, Su Fu cleaned himself up, changed his clothes, and planned to join one of the major sects as a disciple. Back during the Great Zhou, Su Fu had heard of many sects in the martial arts world beyond Zhou. These sects had ancient heritages, making them incredibly powerful. But even Su Fu, backed by the power and status of the Great Zhou, couldn't access those heritages. Needless to say, he had no chance now, so, Su Fu planned to pretend to be a talented nobody and apprentice himself to various major sections. His first stop was Shaolin. Across Zhou, people watched Su Fu shave his head and become a Shaolin monk, a strange look on their faces. Shaolin. They knew that place well. 2 masters on the peerless list had come from Shaolin. Okay, maybe things hadn't turned out great for them, but it still proved Shaolin Temple was a terrifying place. Shaolin Temple was definitely an ancient sect. In the image, Su Fu's devotion to Buddhism, along with his talent, delighted the Shaolin monks. They believed that Su Fu could become a Buddha in Shaolin. Watching the Shaolin monks' excitement, the people of Zhou held their heads in disbelief, thinking Su Fu's move was too cruel. As a master, even a hint of his true skills was enough to shock people. Naturally, he attracted a lot of attention. The Shaolin Temple was full of strong people, but they had no reason to turn down a disciple so dedicated to Buddhism. The abbot of Shaolin even wanted Su Fu as his final disciple. Chapter 55. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Okay, so who would have thought a master would secretly stoop to learn from others? Years passed like that. Su Fu spent that time in the Shaolin Temple, quietly mastering almost all of their secrets. Then one day, after his usual training, he decided it was time to bounce. He figured there was no point in sticking around, better to find a new place. So, Su Fu faked his own death, ditched the monk robes, and just left. Of course, his death ticked off everyone at Shaolin. But after a bunch of dead ends, they had to let it go. Meanwhile, while the Shaolin Temple was busy mourning his death, Su Fu had already changed his look and joined another sect, as a new disciple. Chapter 64, All of China's Numb. This Su Fu's got no shame. China. By now, everyone was tripping out over Su Fu's crazy moves. After splitting from Shaolin, he changed his appearance again and signed up with another famous sect. Word was, after years of hiding, Su Fu had become a master of disguise. Besides, who would suspect that the famous, holy monk from Shaolin would pull a switcheroo and join another sect? So, Su Fu used his experience to slip into the new sect, and after a few years of studying, he became a key player. The sect leader even wanted to make him his main disciple and hand over the whole operation. Of course, after learning all their martial arts, Su Fu pulled the same fake death routine. Silence. All of China was quiet as a tomb. Stealing lessons. Look, stealing happens in all these sections. Every sect treats its martial arts like it's the recipe for Coca-Cola, top secret. So, stealing is a total long shot, but not impossible. The martial arts skills of each sect are absolutely mind-blowing, enough to turn a regular Joe into a superhero, way beyond what normal folks can do. But the rewards come with risks. Anyone caught secretly learning martial arts is gonna have that whole sect breathing down their neck forever. Remember Zhang Sanfeng? Shaolin monks chased him all over the place because he'd learned their Arhat boxing. He finally had to ditch Shaolin and start his own Wudang sect. But hey, no risk, no reward. No matter how tough it gets, there are always sneaky martial arts students out there. The thing is, who would have ever guessed that Su Fu would steal lessons like this? He'd join a sect, become the main disciple, get personal coaching from the leader, and basically be groomed to take over. Then, after grabbing all the martial arts know-how, he'd bail. And after he left, the whole sect would be weeping and wailing for him. It's just unbelievable. Watching Su Fu sneak around, all of China was booing. What a shameless dude. So, before, we had stand-up guys like Zhu Wuwu, who'd do anything to get ahead in the Tiandao Golden List, and righteous masters like Zhang Sanfeng. Now, we've got this total sleazeball on the Heavenly Dao Golden List. So freaking shameless. Who would have thought a strong master would steal lessons like that? If Su Fu wanted, he could have used the master's status to sneak into the back rooms of different sects and find the real secret books, but Su Fu didn't. He figured, what's more fun than getting the education straight from the best teacher while studying undercover? So, after faking his death again, Su Fu didn't waste any time finding another sect. And same deal, he became a disciple again. China, everyone was just slack-jawed. Was Su Fu for real? And some of the old-school immortal sects, the ones that had been around for centuries, were seeing red and about to blow. Like Shaolin. Those monks were still hyped about the scripture notes the sweeping monk left behind, but now, they were all fuming. 2,000 years ago, this guy thought Shaolin Temple was his personal martial arts school and secretly learned everything. And to make it worse, they might even still be bowing down to this deadbeat, holy monk. They were livid. Totally enraged. Go. Find this bastard's memorial tablet. The abbot of Shaolin was so ticked off that he ordered the junior monks to find the old memorial tablets in the morning hall, 2,000 years. That jerk tricked the Shaolin Temple for 2,000 years. Unforgivable. Boom. And it wasn't just Shaolin. Once the pics from that day's Dao Golden List started circulating, all the hidden sects, the ones that had been around forever, were spitting mad. They realized that one of the ancestors they worshipped every day was a phony. In a flash, the whole country went nuts. Every time Su Fu joined a sect, there was a big stir, with everyone trying to figure out if they had any connection to that ancient group. After all, 2,000 years is a long time. Except for the top-tier sects like Shaolin, most of the other sects had fallen apart. Or splintered into a bunch of smaller groups. But 2,000 years isn't that long, and if you looked close, you could find clues. And even if regular folks couldn't figure out the moves Su Fu was learning, they could read the names. So, as soon as Su Fu learned a new move, the sect that specialized in it would freak out and head to their ancestral halls. Su Fu's crazy game was the talk of the town. Every time a sect found out they had a Su Fu look-alike in their morning hall, they started yelling abuse. Not only did this guy steal lessons, but he also kissed up to their ancestors for 2,000 years. Daqin, Zhangtai Palace, even Yingyun was speechless at Su Fu's moves. This Su Fu. He sighed, at a loss for words. A master of his generation, reduced to this, just felt wrong. But no matter what, Su Fu's method was working. After stealing from a bunch of sects, Su Fu had polished his skills as a master to a mirror shine. Not only was he not afraid of facing other masters, but he could even use his moves to fight stronger opponents. And that got Su Fu fired up. So, he stole and learned even harder. And that's how it went, for hundreds of years. Su Fu stole and learned everywhere, until the whole country was numb. At first, when Su Fu joined a sect, people would still joke and tease each other. But now, nobody wanted to say anything. Because they'd realized that pretty much every sect in China, big or small, had been ripped off by Su Fu. He'd even been the leader of some sects. How could anyone trash-talk him for that? Trash-talking. That'd be like slapping themselves in the face. Chapter 65, Learn All Over China. Su Fu decides to create his own martial arts. Numb. Totally numb. At this point, all the major sects in China were silent. This Su Fu was taking stealing lessons to a whole new level. Chapter 56. You are listening at novelfull.audio. But for some reason, the various sects seemed less angry than you'd expect. Talk about kindness. If someone had been stolen from my family and treated like an ancestor for all those years, I'd want to tear Su Fu limb from limb, no question, but if everyone in Kyushu was in the same boat, well, that changes things. So, all of Kyushu was basically face down, chilling, and there they were, watching Su Fu bounce around like a pinball, playing disciple with one sect, then leader of another, having a blast. Gotta admit, Su Fu had it made. He could pick up any skill he wanted, no holds barred. Meanwhile, everyone else, even if they came from a top-tier sect, they were stuck learning their martial arts. Try asking another sect for lessons and you'd get a death glare, guaranteed. So, even the most talented genius was stuck following the same old path. But Su Fu? He was mixing and matching styles from every school, from blades and spears to swords and halberds, not to mention mental techniques, finger jabs, and even weirder stuff like poisoning, disguises. The guy was a walking encyclopedia of combat. He studied everything, from the most sacred inner arts to the dirtiest street fighting, and he was pretty darn good at it. After all, the man had been steeping in martial arts for centuries. Heck, even a pig would be a kung fu master with that kind of dedication. And while Su Fu wasn't exactly gifted, he was a quick study. He soaked up all those complex styles and techniques without losing his mind. Even some of the most respected masters in Kyushu were impressed. Time zipped by, centuries passed in the blink of an eye. One day, after retiring from his gigs as head, disciple, master, uncle, grand master, and whatever else, Su Fu finally decided to quit the undercover learning game. He figured he'd pretty much mastered every martial art in Kyushu. And honestly, he wasn't far off. Everyone in Kyushu had been glued to the Tao Golden List for so long that they realized, yeah, there probably wasn't any style Su Fu hadn't dabbled in. He even wrote a book analyzing the moves kids used when pulling hair and biting ears during fights, complete with systematic instructions on how to make the hair pulling extra painful. Even though everyone in Kyushu was shocked by Su Fu's shamelessness, they had to admit the guy was a legit genius. So, having basically absorbed all the martial arts Kyushu had to offer, Su Fu headed back to the desert island where he'd once hidden from Dezhou. Centuries had passed, and most traces of his life there were gone. Still, Su Fu managed to find a place to settle down and keep on living. At that moment, everyone watching Su Fu suddenly go into hermit mode was stunned, a look of surprise spreading across their faces. Those centuries had flown by, and everyone had gotten a good read on Su Fu's personality. This was a guy who hated being alone. He'd only holed up on that island in the first place because he was afraid the Zhou dynasty would drag him back. It was a safety play. But now, he was practically invincible. Unless there was some hidden master kicking around Kyushu, Su Fu could walk all over the place. And he pretty much had been. For centuries, he'd been scampering around, secretly learning every martial art in Kyushu, and nobody had stopped him. He was unstoppable. So why was Su Fu, after all that fame and mayhem, suddenly choosing to go into hiding? It was baffling. But soon, everyone figured out the reason for Su Fu's big change. He was planning to create his own technique. Creating techniques in Kyushu was seriously tough. Usually, these techniques and martial arts were tweaked and improved over thousands of years by countless people before they were perfected and ready to teach. Every single one of them represented the blood, sweat, and tears of countless practitioners. That's why even big shots like Shaolin took their own martial arts so seriously. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone to the crazy lengths they did to hunt down Zhang Sanfeng. But now, this guy, Su Fu, was going to invent his own style. Zhang Sanfeng had created his Tai Chi style based on the 9-yang manual, blending yin-yang principles and Xiao Bagua concepts, then branching out into Tai Chi boxing, Tai Chi palm, and Tai Chi sword. That was mind-blowing enough. But even that was building on what came before. Without the 9-yang manual, it probably wouldn't have worked. Still, no one could deny Zhang Sanfeng was a genius. His creation of a new martial art had been a total shock, setting Kyushu on fire. And now, this Su Fu was planning to do the same. Everyone had seen Su Fu's borrowing spree over the years. He wasn't exactly a complete screw-up, but he wasn't that talented. A lot of the time, he just relied on his master's inner energy to fake a breakthrough. It was easy for a master to simulate a breakthrough from innate to third-rate, or third-rate to first-rate. Even top masters had trouble spotting the trick. That's why so many sects thought he was a genius and even groomed him to be their leader, but Su Fu couldn't hide anything from the heavenly Tao Golden List. Everyone knew his true level wasn't exactly impressive. And now this guy, with his mediocre talent, was planning to create a technique? How could people not be shocked? Of course, Su Fu had no idea that his every move was being watched by future generations. He was dead serious about inventing his own martial art. He'd learned so many techniques and styles in Kyushu that his mind was a total mess. He'd been suppressing it with his inner energy, but it was only a matter of time before things went south. So, Su Fu learned from his mistakes and decided to invent his own style. I'll call it, the Sacred Heart Art. After a moment's thought, Su Fu named the martial art he was about to create. Sacred Heart Art. Then, he started running simulations. In an instant, he cycled through tons of different martial arts one by one. Then, he started piecing them together. Chapter 66 Sacred Heart Art. Kyushu is stunned. Sacred Heart Art. Everyone in Kyushu who was watching Su Fu invent his martial art was gobsmacked. They desperately tried to remember. But that name didn't ring a bell. Could it be that Su Fu had failed to create anything? The thought flashed through everyone's mind. After all, every genius who'd ever created a martial art in Kyushu had been brilliant. Sure, Su Fu was strong and had learned almost every style in Kyushu, cobbling together the best parts of hundreds of schools. But inventing a new martial art from scratch was still too tough. First of all, you gotta survive. Just when almost nobody had any faith in the so-called Sacred Heart Sutra, Su Fu dug up every martial art in Kyushu that could restore energy and blood. Then, drawing on the properties of phoenix blood, he invented a martial art that could restore energy and blood fast. Super fast. In just a few days, he invented a martial art that stunned everyone. The whole scene left Kyushu speechless. It was too easy. Like it was always meant to be, this incredible recovery technique was suddenly out there. What the heck is going on? Everyone in Kyushu felt a flicker of doubt in their hearts. It was just too smooth. Everyone knew Su Fu's talent level by now, and there was no way he could have created a martial art that quickly, and judging by the recovery speed, it was terrifying. Is it the phoenix blood? After a moment of stunned silence, someone remembered the ancient book Su Fu had been reading, which contained descriptions of the phoenix, reborn from the ashes. Immortal. Its blood contains endless power, and drinking it can make you immortal. That was all they had to go on. At the time, everyone in Kyushu had just assumed that drinking phoenix blood would make them immortal. They had no idea how immortality worked. But now, it seemed the phoenix blood held an incredibly powerful force. It could quickly heal Su Fu's injuries. Chapter 57. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Combining all those martial arts styles to create something new. Not that shocking, really. Still, gotta admit, Su Fu kinda blew everyone's minds. Genius. Yeah, people started thinking of him in a whole new light. I mean, sure, the phoenix blood helped, but to make a technique that almost makes you immortal? That's saying something. But then things got really weird. After that recovery method, he whips out a lightning-fast movement skill and a whole new fighting philosophy. Now that got everyone talking. Okay, maybe the recovery thing was the phoenix blood doing its thing, but what's the excuse this time? Qin Empire, Zhangtai Palace. This Su Fu, he's taken everything he's learned and made it his own. Watching the show in the sky, Emperor Yingyun frowned. This was serious. He wasn't a fighter, but as emperor, he knew enough to see what was up. Normally, Su Fu wasn't anything special. He only hit grandmaster level because of the phoenix blood and all the fancy medicine, but those centuries he spent borrowing moves. They changed him. He learned, like everything. Even Yingyun, who'd never thrown a punch in his life, knew how insane that was. Su Fu is bad news. Yingyun chimed in. He'd seen Su Fu start from the bottom. It was a total transformation. Time can do crazy things to a person. Without that immortality elixir, Su Fu would have maxed out as a low-level fighter, tops. Now, creating a martial art that stunned an entire continent? No way. What about this Sacred Heart technique he supposedly finished? Yingyun squinted as he watched Su Fu work his magic. Heart method, light kung fu, recovery, unbreakable body. Wait a minute. Why haven't we heard of it? That if there was some super powerful martial art out there, everyone would know. Plus, Su Fu's got the juice now. Unless a real grandmaster steps up, no one could touch him. How could a powerhouse like that stay under the radar? Good question. Everyone around him looked puzzled. Exactly. Su Fu was crazy strong now, and if he really had been borrowing moves for hundreds of years like they were saying, that guy couldn't sit still. If he pulled this Sacred Heart art thing off, he would have made some noise. But nobody in the entire continent of Jojo had ever heard of Su Fu, or some other name he was calling himself, Emperor Shirtian. That's just not possible. Boom. Just when everyone was scratching their heads wondering about Su Fu's disappearance, bam. Su Fu, fresh from inventing the Sacred Heart art and ready to show it off, suddenly stops. Of course, that made everyone sit up and take notice, but after seeing what he did next, they weren't so sure, because, apparently, after inventing the Sacred Heart art, Su Fu decided his offense wasn't good enough, so he went back to the drawing board. You gotta give it to him. This immortal guy was patient. Years ticked by, another century bites the dust. The show for the folks of JoJo kept rolling, fast-forwarding through the highlights, and, during those 100 years, Su Fu did come up with moves that were guaranteed to blow everyone away, the 4 wonders of the Sacred Heart. The 4 tribulations of the Sacred Heart. Everyone who saw Su Fu training was speechless. The 4 wonders of the Sacred Heart. Han Tian Ju, Freezing Sky Strike, Xian Bing Ju, Mystic Ice Strike, Wanren Chuan Yun, Thousand Ice Blade Cloud Piercer, and Emperor Tian Quang Lei, Heavenly Emperor's Mad Lightning. Each one packed a serious punch. Wanren Chuan Yun could turn ice into razor blades and send them straight into the sky, piercing the clouds. Emperor Tian Quang Lei turned ice into lightning, blasting the enemy with thunderous force. If those still count as martial arts, that if you were willing to give them a pass. Then, the 4 tribulations of the Sacred Heart showed up and twisted everyone's minds. Chapter 67, Su Fu's fancy moves totally blow JoJo's mind, again. The 4 tribulations of the Sacred Heart. First, there's the shocking tribulation. You use your ice-cold stare to seize someone's heart. A single glance is all it takes to drop a master in seconds. Then comes the evil blood tribulation. Blood attracts blood, causing your opponent to bleed to death from the inside out. Next is the heavenly heart tribulation. You use your own heartbeat to control your enemies, causing their heart to explode. Basically, you sync their heart rate to yours. After chugging that phoenix blood, Su Fu's body isn't exactly human anymore, more like a mythical beast. He can control his heart at will. Hit someone with this move and it's torture city. The first 3 were already sick enough. But the last one, the God-slaying tribulation, was the ultimate game-ender. Su Fu was still working out the kinks, still in the planning stage, but, according to him, it's supposed to be the most powerful move in the entire Sacred Heart technique. It uses the soul as a weapon, which is in a whole other league. After all that time and effort, Su Fu had to admit he couldn't quite get it to work and shelved it for later. Time to head to JoJo. After getting the hang of the basics, Su Fu took a deep breath, cracked a smile, and muttered. Ha! Now, who in JoJo can stop me? Then, he fired up his light kung fu and shot off towards JoJo. At this point, Su Fu's skill was off the charts. Even Zhang Sanfeng, the only grandmaster in JoJo who'd shown his face, was watching Su Fu with a serious look. If Su Fu hadn't learned that Sacred Heart technique, Zhang Sanfeng felt like he could have shut him down anytime, but now, it'd be a real fight. That Sacred Heart technique was just too damn strong. Almost impossible to kill. Even a grandmaster would have trouble. And, on top of everything, Su Fu still hadn't even reached grandmaster level yet. Over in the Han Dynasty. What kind of chaos is this Su Fu going to cause when he gets to JoJo? Looking up at the screen, Liu Bang looked grim. A crazy guy isn't scary. But a crazy guy who's practically invincible. That's everyone's worst nightmare. Ming Dynasty. Emperor Shi Tian, Su Fu. Emperor Zhu Yuanzhang stared at the figure on the screen and clenched his fists. How would we handle someone like that? That there was a gap of 1,000 years, but just watching Su Fu made Zhu Yuanzhang's head hurt. Sure, with the Ming Dynasty's military strength, he didn't have to be too worried about grandmasters. If a grandmaster really ticked off Zhu Yuanzhang, he'd be taken out by the army. But this Su Fu, there was something scary about him. Besides everything else, he had no shame whatsoever. Grandmasters were generally respected people who wouldn't stoop to anything too low. So, except for a few special cases, the emperors of the dynasties didn't have to lose sleep over assassinations. Chapter 58. You are listening at novelfull.audio. But what about Su Fu? Everything on the Tiandao Golden List paints a picture of Su Fu as anything but a stand-up guy, and the thing that really sticks in people's craw is that he supposedly drank the elixir of immortality and is still kicking around. Even though the name Su Fu doesn't exactly ring a bell for most folks, there's a nagging feeling he's out there somewhere in JoJo, just waiting for his chance to stir things up. Tianmen, huh? The thought popped into Zhu Yuanzhang's head, remembering a scene from when the Tiandao Golden List first showed up. Su Fu was holed up in Tianmen. "Check it out," Zhu Yuanzhang barked out the order, and just like Zhu Yuanzhang, emperors across Jiuzhou were issuing the same directive: Tianmen had to be investigated. But unlike the previous scramble to recruit top talent, this time there was a definite edge. A lethal intent. If Su Fu refused to throw in his lot with their dynasty, some emperors were seriously considering sending troops across the border. After all, Su Fu was a ticking time bomb in Jiuzhou. No Su Fu, no peace, and this wasn't just some backwater dynasty thinking. Even the big leagues were issuing secret orders. Meanwhile, as Jiuzhou started to simmer with Su Fu-related anxieties, the Tiandao Golden List flickered, showing a few scenes from his life. Su Fu touched down in Jiuzhou, and for a while, nothing much happened. He just tooled around, living the high life, but then, boredom set in. He felt life was just too damn dull. Immortality, even with the Sacred Heart Sutra patching you up so you couldn't get hurt or feel pain, it was all just too blah for Su Fu, so he cooked up a scheme that would send shockwaves through Jiuzhou. The scene showed Su Fu joining some small-time sect, then pulling a fast one by taking a group of disciples out on some mission, and then without batting an eye, he killed them. Then, he scratched himself up a bit and hightailed it back. All panicked, he pinned the whole thing on a rival sect that the small sect already had beef with. He even used the Sacred Heart technique to flatline his heart. Faked his own death. Another fake out. After seeing Su Fu pull the same stunt again after so many years, people in Jiuzhou were beyond jaded, but this time, he faked his death to ditch the sect he'd learned from, and this time, the real goal was to spark a war between the two sects. And boy, did it work like a charm. These two sects were already itching for a fight, so when their own disciple got iced right in front of them, all hell broke loose. A brutal brawl erupted. And Su Fu? He used the confusion to slink away. Then, he went straight to the rival sect. He ran the exact same play. In the end, both sects were decimated, practically wiped off the map, and the reason for all this carnage? Su Fu was bored and looking for kicks. The whole thing left everyone in Jiuzhou slack-jawed. Could you even do that? Chapter 68 Fighting Dirty. The real deal. Jiuzhou was stunned by Su Fu's latest antics. It was clear Su Fu didn't have any genuine beef with those sections. After all, Su Fu was a top-tier master. It would be nearly impossible for some rinky-dink sect to cross him. And if he did have a bone to pick with them, he could just wipe them off the map. Why go through all that song and dance? Bottom line, Su Fu was just bored, so he made himself a little drama. While the two sects were slugging it out, even their leaders were on their last legs. Then Su Fu, cool as a cucumber, strolled up and spilled the beans. He even used his disguise skills to morph into one of their own disciples right in front of their eyes. They were dumbfounded. The sect leaders were so mad they croaked right then and there. Huh! Su Fu just cackled and disappeared into the Jiuzhou wilds. Qin Zhangtai Palace. This Su Fu. Yingyun was speechless. If Su Fu had been driven by a thirst for power, scheming his way into becoming a Taoist priest to deceive the emperor and steal martial arts techniques, that was one thing, but now, he was just doing it for the heck of it. He stirred up a war between two sects just to kill time. It was beyond belief. If Su Fu's still out there, he's a menace to Jiuzhou. Guy sighed, he's nothing like the other grandmasters. Right now, there were 3 grandmasters on the list. Zhang Sanfeng was a true grandmaster through and through. He lived in Song Dynasty territory, but only promised to step in if the Song Dynasty was on the brink of collapse. Otherwise, he wasn't interested in Jiuzhou's power struggles. And the sweeping monk? No need to even mention him. He'd already noped out of this dimension, chasing after some idealized beauty. Even if the sweeping monk stuck around, the major dynasties wouldn't be too worried. He was a Buddhist, after all, and had clearly seen through the world's illusions. Fighting and killing were beneath him. But Su Fu was different. He had ambition oozing out of his pores. And he started a war between two sects because he was bored. That was beyond the pale. Looks like I'm sending troops to find this. Tianmen. Zheng's face hardened. A lot of Zhou dynasties had already sent soldiers to poke around Tianmen. They did it to recruit him, and if they couldn't get him on their side, they might just have to put him down. Su Fu was strong, no doubt about it. A grandmaster for sure. But if the Zhou dynasties teamed up, he'd be toast. Up to now, Qin hadn't made a move, but now, Zheng was thinking, maybe it was time to send the army. Time marched on, and just when things were starting to get edgy in Zhou, the Golden List showed Su Fu's next string of antics, leaving the audience completely numb. Su Fu bounced all over Zhou, sowing discord between the major sects. Before long, he got tired of messing with small fry sects and started targeting the big names in Zhou. It wasn't long before Zhou was on the verge of chaos. And the most unbelievable thing? Just to spice things up, Su Fu personally stepped in, taking on the alias Emperor Shi Tian to unite the evil and demon sects in Zhou, the bad guys ganging up on the good guys. Then, under the name of Su Fu, he gathered the righteous folks together and called for a vote for the martial arts world leader. And guess what? Su Fu, with his near grandmaster level cultivation, won. The head honcho of the martial arts world, the boss of the demon sects, and so, Su Fu started playing both sides. First, he led the righteous martial artists and pushed the demon sects back on their heels. Then, as the head of the demon sects, he bumped off some righteous folks and retreated with a feigned defeat. The whole martial arts world turned into a bloodbath. But nobody in Zhou had any idea that the respected leader of the martial arts world and the most wanted demon sect leader were actually the same dude. Beyond numb now. The entire martial arts community in Zhou, both the good guys and the bad guys, were sitting in stunned silence as they watched the scene play out. Chapter 59. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Even the fiercest opponents, the ones who charged in screaming and fighting with bloodshot eyes, fell silent. What was there left to fight about? This long-standing feud between good and evil, it was all because of this? Seriously? Actually, everyone had it wrong about Su Fu. The bad blood between the good and evil factions started way before Su Fu even showed up. Su Fu just cranked the animosity up to 11. Up in Tianmen, Su Fu scoffed. You average Joes couldn't possibly understand the power I wield. Watching the Tiandao Golden List, a smirk crept across his face. I've got both sides eating out of my hand. Sure, it all started as a lark when he was a younger man, but Su Fu took pride in pulling the wool over the entire martial arts world's eyes. But a sudden glint flashed in his eyes, his face turning serious. He stared past the gates of Tianmen. My ambitions run deeper than that. Phoenix blood had a catch. Swallowing that phoenix blood had given Su Fu immortality, no question. 2,000 years proved that. But while he couldn't die, he wasn't invulnerable. He still needed to find something to achieve true immortality. Dragon Yuan. If there were phoenixes in this world, then there had to be dragons, too. After realizing his body was starting to show its age, Su Fu had been scouring old books for anything that could fix it. Having played both sides and become a leader of good and evil made tracking down ancient books a whole lot easier than it used to be. It only took a few years for Su Fu to find hints about real dragons in some obscure text. Dragon Yuan wouldn't just make him immortal, it would seriously boost his powers. Ever since, he'd been searching for signs of real dragons, but finding the phoenix had been a 1 in a million shot. How the heck was he supposed to find a real dragon? Now, with the Tiandao Golden List popping up, Su Fu's dormant hope flickered back to life. Maybe the Golden List held clues to finding a real dragon. Chapter 69, Zhou freaks out. Again. The possibility of immortality, real dragon. The thought made Su Fu glance up at the Golden List. The images were flowing, centuries ticking by. It was almost now. The phoenix blood was starting to wear off. Even Su Fu looked grim. He'd just watched himself flip out over the first signs of aging. And Su Fu wasn't the only one. Zhou, which had been getting used to Su Fu's shenanigans, was thrown for a loop again. They all knew that Su Fu had taken phoenix blood and become immortal. And for a long time, that elixir had been proven to work. After all, Su Fu had been hopping around for thousands of years, and he hadn't kicked the bucket from old age. On top of that, he was still vigorous. That was nearly 2,000 years. Now, everyone was seeing Su Fu age. They were dumbfounded. What the heck was happening? Was there something wrong with the elixir? But when Su Fu frantically searched through ancient texts, the people of Zhou figured out why he was aging. Phoenix blood only made you deathless. The only reason Su Fu hadn't shown any aging was because the phoenix blood was still working. Now, 2,000 years later, the phoenix blood couldn't keep Su Fu looking like himself. Su Fu's face started aging fast, turning ghastly. Finally, he grabbed a mask and slapped it on. That was the weird, off-white mask everyone in Zhou had seen. At the same time, the Su Fu in the Golden List was frantically searching for something that would make him truly immortal. He finally found something in an ancient book, True Dragon. The dragon Yuan would make him immortal. Silence. When Su Fu uncovered the existence of the real dragon, Zhou went ballistic. Finding the phoenix had made the Emperor of Zhou wish he could rewind time 2,000 years and snag the phoenix blood before Su Fu. Now, things were getting crazy. Real dragon. Plus, judging by that mask Emperor Shirtian was wearing, he hadn't achieved true immortality. That meant there was a real dragon chilling somewhere in Zhou. Phoenix blood had made Su Fu immortal for nearly 2,000 years, and he was just now starting to age, and he was still deathless. So, what about Dragon Yuan? Boom! How could Zhou not lose its mind at that thought? The Han Dynasty, Weiyang Palace. I will have that Dragon Yuan. Lu Bang's eyes blazed with determination. No matter what it costs. Immortality. Every emperor, past and present, craved it. But immortality was usually a pipe dream. Su Fu's existence proved that it wasn't some crazy fantasy. It was possible. But the phoenix had been MIA for 2,000 years. No one in Zhou could find it. But this real dragon? It was out there, somewhere in Zhou. As long as he got that Dragon Yuan, he could live forever. No emperor could resist that kind of temptation. Yes, sir. Fan Kuai, Yingbu, and the other generals didn't hesitate, raising their hands and speaking respectfully. Even Zhang Liang and Xiao He, the emperor's top advisors, held their tongues. Hunting down the real dragon would drain the country's resources. Usually, wise ministers like them would speak up and try to stop it, but no one was stupid. Zhang Liang and Xiao He knew how tempting immortality was to the emperor. Anyone who tried to give advice would just get on the emperor's bad side. So, Zhang Liang and Xiao He kept their mouths shut. Daming, Forbidden City. Eternal life. Zhu Yuanzhang's eyes flickered with longing. After a moment, he patted Zhu Yunwen's head and sighed. If I live forever, you'll never be emperor. Yunwen, do you want Grandpa Huang to live forever? Of course. Young Zhu Yunwen said with a smile. Then Grandpa Huang can always play with me. Ha ha ha. Zhu Yuanzhang laughed, pinching Zhu Yunwen's cheek. You're such a good grandson. But. Zhu Yuanzhang glanced at Zhu Di, who was standing nearby, and said calmly. There are some who might not want me to live forever. Humph. Chapter 60. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Zhu Yuanzhang let out a loud humph, making Zhu Di jump. Immediately, Zhu Di dropped to his knees, pleading, Father, of course I want you to live forever. He trailed off, unsure what to say. What's gotten into him, star. Really? Zhu Yuanzhang's face softened a bit, but he still eyed Zhu Di suspiciously. I hope so. He turned his attention back to Zhu Yunwen, now fussing over the child and ignoring Zhu Di, still kneeling there looking disheveled. Zhu Di just stared, speechless. Then, he brushed himself off and stood up. The old man's favoritism is incurable. He couldn't help but feel slighted. Why the double standard? Honest to God, I don't want anything bad to happen to him. Tang Dynasty. Li Shimin shot to his feet, staring at the Tiandao golden list. His fist clenched so tightly, his knuckles were white, and a trickle of blood ran down his hand, but he didn't even notice it. Find the dragon, that the order ripped through Chang'an, echoing in every direction. Song Dynasty, even the Yuan, Qing, Xiongnu, and Turkic tribes were on their feet, eyes glued to the Tiandao golden list, buzzing with excitement, immortality. All they had to do was find this dragon, and eternal life was theirs. No emperor could resist that kind of temptation, and it wasn't just the emperors, the martial arts world was in a frenzy, too. They'd seen what Su Fu had accomplished after swallowing phoenix blood. Besides, they knew that the dragon essence gave whoever consumed it a massive power boost. For some martial arts junkies, that was as irresistible as immortality was for emperors. Who could say no? Chapter 70, The Dragon Appears. Yingyun makes a choice. Tianmen. Su Fu couldn't care less about the chaos erupting across Zhuzhou. He didn't even register the murderous stares directed his way, all his focus was on the Tiandao golden list. He was waiting for the glimpse into the future. Did Zhuzhou even have a real dragon? Even Emperor Shi Tian, with all his power, couldn't say for sure if it existed. He knew that there were records of such a creature, but that was it. The real dragon was even rarer than the phoenix. The images flickered, in the vision. After Su Fu learns about the real dragon, he uses his positions as leader of the martial arts world and the demon sect to search. Time crawled by. Eventually, after the Great War, the good and evil forces realized that they couldn't afford a fight to the death. So, the large-scale battles died down and small fights broke out between minor sections. And Su Fu's old titles, Wulian Alliance leader and demon sect leader, started to fade into memory. Of course, this was also because Su Fu had become obsessed with finding the real dragon. Things calmed down in the Wulian world. A century passed, the scene shifted, presenting a closer look at the future. Now. At Tianmen, Su Fu leaped to his feet, eyes blazing. He could barely breathe as he watched the images unfold. The golden list was showing him in the present. Then, the future began. A flash of Emperor Shi Tian with his mask, standing at Tianmen. Then another scene. Everyone in Zhuzhou watched, holding their breath. Did the real dragon exist? It all depended on whether Su Fu could find it. If he did, everyone in Zhuzhou would have a shot at obtaining the dragon essence and achieving immortality. If he failed, then maybe the whole idea of a real dragon was just a myth. Either way, the major dynasties were going to rethink this whole dragon hunt. The scenes rushed forward. Su Fu, once again Emperor Shi Tian, travels around Zhuzhou, searching for the real dragon. After countless hardships, he uncovers the location of the dragon in an ancient book, at the bottom of the sea. Without hesitating, Su Fu sets sail. The image shifts. Years later, Su Fu finds an island with the real dragon. A huge battle begins. After 2,000 years, Su Fu's cultivation has gone beyond Grandmaster. He is immensely powerful. But this real dragon is not your average beast. As the two fought, the dragon summoned massive waves and pulled on the power of nature itself. Su Fu was forced to retreat. The appearance of the real dragon electrified all of Zhuzhou. So, they do exist. Sure, the real dragon was incredibly powerful, able to control the elements. But Su Fu could hold his own. Which meant that it was still within the realm of mortal beings. Could they have a shot at obtaining the dragon essence? The emperors went nuts. Qin. Real dragons, they're real. Yingyun stared at the screen, eyes wide. His face was grim. He'd given up on immortality. Now, a glimmer of hope had appeared. Even someone as stoic as Yingyun couldn't hide his excitement. In Zhuzhou, there was a dragon. Father, this dragon essence might not be as useful as you think. Yingyun frowned, watching his father. The phoenix blood was fine. Its power was gentle and could be taken by just about anyone. But this dragon. It's the most masculine and powerful entity in existence, with a power that's incredibly hard to control. Only a grandmaster could handle it. As a land immortal, Yingyun had a broader view than most. He could see the raw, untamed energy of the dragon. The phoenix blood was like a flame, hot, but not enough to instantly burn a person alive. but the dragon was like thunder. You would have to be a master to survive consuming it. Yingyun thought that he could probably temper the tyranny of the essence himself and leave only the life-giving vitality, but why bother going through so much trouble? He knew he could get an elixir of immortality from the system that would be better than dragon essence. Why go out to sea? It would be much more fun to watch Jojo tear itself apart over a dragon. Your Majesty, Ninth Master is right. Guy Nian nodded, face serious. Let's forget about the effects for now. We don't know where this island is. And even if we find it, fighting the other dynasties for control of the dragon would be a disaster. We'd lose too much. And the damage to Jojo would be devastating. After Su Fu set sail, the scene shifted. There was no way of knowing the location of the island on the ocean.